Before Coes became the setting of a murder investigation, it was supposed to be one more stop in a life shaped by travel, work, and plans for the future. Anastazja Rubińska was 27 years old and came from Wrocław, Poland. Her brother, Adrian, remembered her as someone with goals, lots of them. She wanted to see the world. She was interested in modeling, and she seemed determined to build a life that would let her keep moving toward both dreams. After high school, Anastazja enrolled in beauty school in Poland. She did not finish the program, but while she was there, she found a few smaller modeling opportunities. They were not major runway shows or international campaigns. Still, they gave her a glimpse of the future she imagined for herself. But travel became the more constant thread in her life. Anastazja found work connected to hotels, five-star resorts, and restaurants in different countries. The precise nature of every position is not clear, but the work allowed her to go abroad again and again, and that mattered to her. The photographs she shared captured a life spread across different places. Not simply pictures of how she looked, but a record of where she had been and how much of the world she still wanted to experience. Her family described her as energetic, friendly, and full of plans. Her father, Andrzej, also said she tended to trust people and believe there was good in them. That detail would later be repeated often in accounts of the case. But let's be clear about something. Trusting another person does not make someone responsible for the harm done to them. The responsibility belongs entirely to the person who chooses to cause that harm. As a teenager, Anastazja had a rebellious streak. She occasionally worried her parents, as teenagers do. It was also during those younger years that she met Mikkel. Their relationship lasted for roughly 13 years. They grew up together, and their shared dream became remarkably simple: travel as much as they could and build a future side by side. They discussed marriage, although they had not made a final decision. What they had decided was that the next stage of their lives would require work, savings, and another move. In May 2023, that decision brought them to Kos. From the outside, the Greek island looked like the kind of place people visited to escape ordinary life. Beaches, hotels, warm evenings, and tourists arriving with nothing more urgent to do than choose where to eat. But Anastazja and Mikkel were not there on vacation. They had come to work. Both found employment at a five-star hotel in the Marmari area. Anastazja worked as a hostess in the hotel's restaurant. By June, she had been there for only about a month. Still new to the job, still settling into the island, and still at the beginning of whatever the couple hoped Coes would make possible. That distinction matters. Coes was not an impulsive escape for Anastazja. It was part of a future she and Mikkel had been building together for years. They had come there to earn money, move forward, and decide what came next. Then came June 12th. A painful injury at work changed Anastazja's plans for the evening. And before midnight, Mikkel would be watching her location shift across his phone while her messages became increasingly alarming. The first warning did not come from a witness or a security camera. It came directly from Anastazja. She had been drinking, she felt unsafe, and she wanted Mikkel to collect her. June 12th, 2023, had begun as another workday. Anastazja put on her uniform and started her shift at the hotel, where she worked as a restaurant hostess. At some point that day, she badly burned her hand. She was in pain, and she had not eaten, but she finished the shift. Mikkel was still working when Anastazja clocked out. The two expected to meet later at a nearby bar, a quick date after work. In the meantime, she went out to buy something to drink. There was nothing alarming about that. They used the local shops regularly, sometimes together and sometimes alone. Mikkel had no reason to treat a routine errand as an emergency, and Anastazja remained in contact with him. As the evening went on, she sent messages explaining where she was and what she was doing. While Mikkel stayed at work, Anastazja ended up near a local shop. Surveillance footage reportedly showed her by a fence, eating snacks and drinking wine. At first, she appeared to be alone. Then, several men joined her. Witnesses later placed Anastazja with the group from around 8:30 that evening. Some details about those final hours came from witness accounts and early media reporting, so they would need to be tested against the CCTV, phone data, and evidence later presented in court. But one point was already clear. By roughly 10:30 p.m., the mood had changed. Anastazja contacted Mikkel and asked him to come for her. She said she was drunk, did not feel safe, and wanted to be collected. Think about the position that put him in. He knew she was frightened. He also knew he could not simply walk out of work and reach her immediately. There would be a delay, and that delay mattered. Then another man offered Anastazja a ride home on his motorbike. Mikkel objected. He did not want her getting onto a motorcycle with someone she barely knew, especially after she had just said she felt unsafe. He urged her to stay where she was and wait for him. Anastazja reassured him that it would be all right. This part has to be said plainly. Accepting a ride, having a drink, or trusting another person did not cause what happened to Anastazja. Responsibility belongs to the person who chose to harm her. Nothing about her decisions that evening changes that. Soon afterward, Mikkel began receiving location messages from her phone. One location arrived, then another, then a third, all within a short period. Instead of reassuring him, they did the opposite. Why was her position changing so quickly? Was she already moving? And if she was, who was taking her? One final message indicated that everything was fine. Then, silence. No more calls, no more texts, no explanation. Mikkel tried to reach her, but Anastazja did not answer. By the end of the night, he knew this was not a routine delay. She had asked for help, sent rapidly, changing locations, reassured him once, and then vanished from contact. He did not wait until morning. He alerted Anastazja's family in Poland and contacted Greek police to report her missing. Now investigators had to identify the people around her during those final hours. The clearest answer was waiting on a security recording. Anastazja leaving on the back of one man's motorbike. CCTV could show investigators who left with Anastazja. It could not show what happened after the motorbike passed out of frame. Police began collecting surveillance footage from the shop where she had spent part of that evening, then widened the search to cameras covering the surrounding streets. They were trying to turn Mikkel's final messages into a physical timeline, something they could see, compare, and verify. At first, Anastazja appeared alone near the shop. She was eating snacks and drinking wine. Later, the footage showed her in the company of several men. Witnesses reportedly confirmed seeing the group together from around 8:30 that evening. That timing mattered. Roughly 2 hours later, Anastazja told Mikkel that she felt unsafe and wanted him to collect her. Soon after that, she said another man had offered her a ride. Now investigators could see at least part of that exchange for themselves. One of the cameras captured Anastazja getting onto the back of a motorbike. Then the bike moved away and disappeared beyond the camera's view. Think about what the footage established and what it didn't. It showed who left the area with her. It did not prove what happened afterward. It did not show their destination. And it could not tell police whether Anastazja went willingly, whether she remained in danger, or why her messages stopped. Witness accounts and information reportedly provided by a local shopkeeper helped investigators identify the rider as Salahuddin S., a 32-year-old Bangladeshi national who had been living on Kos. Early reporting about his work, residence, and personal history was limited and sometimes inconsistent. Some reports said he had worked in construction and had recently lost his job. At this stage, though, those details were background, not evidence that he had harmed Anastazja. What mattered was much simpler. He appeared to be the last known person seen leaving with her. Police also identified and located the other men shown near Anastazja that evening. Within hours, they were brought in for questioning. According to their reported account, they had encountered Anastazja while she was intoxicated and had tried to help her get home safely. But that explanation immediately ran into a problem. Anastazja had not arrived home. Mikkel was the person who reported her missing, and he had been trying to reach her since their contact abruptly ended. If someone had safely taken her back, where was she? Why had she stopped responding? And why had her phone generated 3 different locations within minutes before going silent? Investigators reportedly noticed scratches or other recent marks on Salahuddin's face and arms. At least one other man was also said to have a visible mark near his nose. The men reportedly attributed the injuries to earlier accidents. Those marks raised questions, especially because Anastazja was still missing. But an unexplained scratch is not proof of an assault, much less proof of murder. Police needed evidence that could connect a person to Anastazja after the motorbike left the camera's view. DNA samples were collected from the men as investigators worked to test their statements against the physical record. Were the injuries relevant? Had anyone else in the group played a role? Or had the men simply been present before Anastazja left with Salahuddin? At that point, Those were investigative questions, not established conclusions. The cameras and witness accounts had narrowed the inquiry to one crucial fact. Salahuddin was reportedly the last known man to leave with Anastazja. But police still lacked the one thing that could explain where that journey ended. Then Anastazja's phone reappeared in an abandoned building, without its SIM card, with its settings altered, and with the person carrying it nowhere in sight. Finding a missing person's phone can open an investigation. This phone appeared to have been stripped of the very information detectives needed most. Investigators began with the digital trail Anastazja had left behind. Mobile phone records, shared locations, and cell tower data helped them narrow down where her device had traveled after she left the shop. Here's what that kind of information can actually tell police. When a phone communicates with a cellular network, the connection is recorded through nearby towers. Those records can place a device within a general area and show how it moved between coverage zones. Location data can sometimes narrow that area further. But it is not a video recording. It cannot identify who was holding the phone. And by itself, it cannot prove what happened to the person who owned it. Investigators still needed CCTV, witness accounts, and physical evidence to make sense of the signals. Reports indicated that Anastazja's phone remained active until approximately 11:30 that night. Then it stopped communicating with the network. Its final known activity placed it several kilometers from the home she shared with Michel. That mattered. She had been expected to return home. Instead, her messages had ended. The device had moved elsewhere, and then the signal had vanished. Police and local volunteers eventually recovered the phone in or near an abandoned building in the Marmari area. For one brief moment, that discovery must have felt like progress. A missing person's device can contain calls, messages, photographs, searches, maps, sometimes an entire timeline. But this one raised more questions than it answered. The SIM card had reportedly been removed. Location functions appeared to have been disabled. Data on the device also seemed to have been deleted. Those details had to be examined forensically, and none of them alone identified who had handled the phone. Taken together, though, they did not look like a device that had simply slipped from someone's pocket. Someone appeared to have interfered with it. Think about what that meant for the search. Anastazja's phone was not only a source of evidence, it was the tool she could have used to call Michel, contact police, share another location, or ask anyone nearby for help. Now the phone had been separated from her, silenced, and left behind. And Anastazja was still missing. The search widened across Kaz. Police officers worked alongside volunteers and rescue personnel. Sniffer dogs were brought in. Teams searched from the ground while aerial resources helped cover areas that would have taken far longer to inspect on foot. The landscape made everything harder. Around Marmari, Tragically, and the Idyllic wetlands, searchers faced exposed fields, marshland, dry vegetation, scattered trees, and ground baked under the intense June sun. From a distance, the terrain could look open and easy to read. Up close, branches, reeds, and uneven patches of land created countless places where something, or someone, could be hidden. An appeal for information kept Anastazja's face before the public. Her family followed the search from a position no family wants to occupy, far from home, dependent on updates, and knowing that every hour mattered. As the case involved a Polish citizen abroad, Polish authorities and prosecutors also became involved alongside the investigation in Greece. One day passed, then another. The phone had given detectives a geographical trail and signs of possible concealment. What it had not given them was Anastazja. With every day that ended without her, the fear inside her family became harder to hold back. Then came the sixth day. Near the Idyllic wetlands, a volunteer probing an unusual pile of branches beside a tree noticed a plastic bag. The search teams had reached the place someone had tried to make invisible. The location was close enough to the search area to be found, yet concealed well enough to remain undetected for 6 days. On June 18th, volunteers moved through the exposed landscape around Tragically and the Idyllic wetlands. There was little shelter from the June sun, mostly dry ground, low vegetation, scattered trees, and wide stretches of land that had to be checked piece by piece. It was slow work. Searchers walked in lines, examining the ground and probing places where someone, or something, might have been hidden. By then, Anastazja had been missing for nearly a week. Her family had made public appeals. Police had followed her digital trail. Volunteers had covered large parts of the island. Still, there had been no sign of her. Then, one volunteer noticed something near a tree. Branches and dry vegetation appeared disturbed or deliberately arranged. It did not look like a natural pile left by the wind. When the area was examined more closely, the searchers realized there was a plastic bag beneath it. The rest of the team was called over. So were the police. Inside was the body of a woman. This is where it is important to separate what investigators could establish from what early reports claimed. The method of killing was not something a volunteer, or even an officer arriving at the scene, could simply determine at a glance. That required a forensic examination. The scene had to be secured, documented, and processed before investigators could begin making medically or legally supported conclusions. The remains were later identified as Anastazja. 6 days of uncertainty ended in the worst possible way. For her parents, her brother, and Michel, the public appeals and desperate waiting were over. They finally knew where she was, but there was no relief in that answer. The young woman who had moved to Kaz to work, travel, and build a future had become the victim at the center of a homicide investigation. Police preserved the area around the tree and began collecting anything that might explain how Anastazja had arrived there. Biological material, fibers, and other trace evidence. The plastic used to conceal her. Disturbances in the surrounding ground and vegetation. Investigators also had to compare the scene with phone records, surveillance footage, witness statements, and the known movements of the people who had been with her on June 12th. And then there was the geography. Anastazja's body had reportedly been found roughly 500 meters from the abandoned building where her phone was recovered. The location was also approximately 1 kilometer from Salahuddin's residence. Think about those 3 points for a second. The discarded phone, the concealed body, and the home of the man seen leaving with Anastazja on a motorbike. That did not prove who killed her. Proximity can direct an investigation, but it cannot replace evidence. Now that the case had formally shifted from a missing person inquiry to a homicide investigation, every conclusion would need to survive far more than suspicion. Detectives had to show who was with Anastazja during her final hours, what happened to her, who moved or concealed her body, and whether those steps could be connected to one person. The urgency had changed. Police were no longer searching for Anastazja in the hope of bringing her home. Homicide investigators were assembling a case that could withstand forensic review, defense challenges, and eventually a courtroom. Anastazja had been found, and the geography now linked 3 critical points: her body, her silenced phone, and the residence of the man last seen leaving with her. Distance alone could be coincidence. What police reportedly found inside Salahuddin's room, and what his own devices revealed, was far harder to explain. Salahuddin denied killing Anastazja, but investigators were no longer evaluating one consistent account. They were comparing changing statements against physical and digital evidence. After Anastazja's body was discovered, Salahuddin was arrested on suspicion of murder. At that stage, he was a suspect, not yet a convicted offender, and his denial remained clear. But his reported account of that night had shifted. During the initial questioning, the men seen with Anastazja reportedly said they had encountered her while she was intoxicated and had simply helped her get home safely. Later, Salahuddin acknowledged that Anastazja had entered his residence and claimed they had spent time there. He still denied murdering or sexually assaulting her. Now, an inconsistency is not proof by itself. People lie for reasons that have nothing to do with murder. They panic. They hide embarrassing details. They misunderstand questions. So investigators had to do more than point at 2 different stories and call the case solved. They tested those stories against everything else: CCTV footage, witness accounts, mobile phone locations, and the forensic examination of Salahuddin's room. That search reportedly uncovered blonde hair, clothing, and a blouse bearing suspected biological stains. Forensic testing was crucial here. The appearance of a stain could suggest a direction, but only laboratory results could establish whether material was biological and whether any recovered DNA was connected to Anastazja. Then there were the injuries. During questioning, police had reportedly observed scratches on Salahuddin's face and arms. Another man had a visible mark near his nose. The men attributed the injuries to an earlier accident. Prosecutors, however, would later connect Salahuddin's scratches to their theory that Anastazja resisted an attack. That distinction matters. A scratch may support a theory when it fits the timing, DNA, and other evidence. On its own, it does not explain who caused it or when. The same caution applied to Salahuddin's phone. Investigators reportedly recovered searches concerning how to delete data, mislead police, and prevent a body from being identified. If verified, that history could be deeply significant. But digital searches are not self-explanatory. Prosecutors still had to establish when the searches occurred, who controlled the device, and whether the relevant account belonged to Salahuddin. There was also the reported airline ticket to Italy, scheduled for the day of his arrest. The prosecution interpreted it as evidence that he was preparing to leave Kos before police could close in. The defense could argue that travel, by itself, was not an admission of guilt. Salahuddin continued to deny the charges of murder and rape. Questions also remained about the other men seen with Anastazja. Their association with Salahuddin and the reported injuries raised suspicion during the investigation. But suspicion is not a verdict, and the supplied record establishes only Salahuddin's eventual conviction for her murder. Greek investigators were building something broader than a case around one scratch, one search, or one changed statement. Their theory combined the CCTV showing Anastazja leaving with Salahuddin, location data, witness testimony, forensic findings, the condition of her phone, and his reported conduct after she disappeared. Polish prosecutors and authorities also became involved, seeking to independently clarify the death of a Polish citizen abroad. No single clue carried the entire case. Together, the altered account, physical evidence, digital trail, locations, and planned departure gave prosecutors the chain they intended to present in court. The trial would decide whether that chain proved murder beyond a reasonable doubt, or whether it was a collection of suspicious details with gaps the defense could still exploit. 18 months after Anastazja disappeared, the case reached its legal conclusion. The courtroom still had to separate what had been suspected in June 2023 from what could actually be proved. Salahuddin faced charges of murdering Anastazja, along with a rape charge reported in coverage of the proceedings. He pleaded not guilty and continued to deny the accusations. The prosecution's reconstruction began outside the shop. Anastazja left that area with Salahuddin on his motorbike and was taken to his residence. Prosecutors argued that she was killed after arriving there and that her body was later concealed near the Idyllic's wetlands. But the case did not rest on one perfect piece of evidence. It was the chain that mattered. CCTV placed Anastazja with Salahuddin. Witness accounts helped establish who had approached her and who left with her. Mobile location records traced movements after she disappeared from camera view. Forensic findings connected Anastazja to Salahuddin's residence. Investigators also considered the changes in his statements and what they believed were attempts to erase, discard, or conceal evidence. Look at those locations together. The residence was where investigators found evidence connecting Anastazja to the accused. Her discarded phone had been stripped of data and separated from her. Her body was discovered near the wetlands, roughly 1 kilometer from Salahuddin's home. And when police searched his room, they reportedly found a plane ticket for travel to Italy on the day of his arrest. A ticket alone proves very little. A phone alone cannot explain who erased it. Even a changing story is not, by itself, a murder conviction. But placed beside the CCTV, witness testimony, location data, forensic evidence, and the geography of the discoveries, each detail reinforced the next. In December 2024, a Greek court found Salahuddin guilty of Anastazja's murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment. At that moment, his legal status changed. He was no longer merely the man last seen leaving with her, a suspect under investigation, or an accused man denying the charges. He was Anastazja's convicted murderer. For her family, that distinction mattered. It still could not repair what had happened. Her father, Andrzej, told the press that the punishment would not bring Anastazja back, but that the offender had received what he deserved. His position was clear. Salahuddin should never be free to hurt anyone again. Anastazja's brother, Adrian, reportedly expressed his grief in far angrier terms, saying he wanted 10 minutes alone with the man who killed his sister. That is not something to celebrate or endorse. It shows the scale of the devastation left behind, the kind of rage that can come when a family spends days hoping for a safe return, only to learn that the person they loved is never coming home. The case drew sustained attention in Greece and Poland. It also became part of a wider conversation about the safety of women working or traveling abroad. But public attention can create an illusion that every question has been answered. It has not. The conviction establishes Salahuddin's legal responsibility for Anastazja's murder. The publicly available material supplied for this case does not establish that the other men seen with her earlier that evening were convicted of participating in it. Nor does the public record reveal every movement, every decision, or the exact role, if any, of anyone else after Anastazja disappeared from view. That is the distance between a verdict and a complete reconstruction. The court supplied a legal answer and a life sentence. What it could not restore was Anastazja herself, a traveler, a hotel worker, Michal's partner, and a daughter and sister whose plans ended only weeks after she arrived on Kos. If you want more carefully told true crime investigations, subscribe to the channel. And in the comments, tell me which part of the evidentiary chain you found most decisive, and which questions you believe this case still leaves in darkness.